Welcome to the EQ Video Tip. I'm your host, Eric Forsetter. Thanks again for watching 200 editions of the EQ Video Tip. Before we jump in, let's review the goals of EQ Video Tip. What's on tap for today? Well, it's episode 200. Hard to believe it. And because of that, we're going to have a double episode, 200 and 201. And it comes to us from Nick Hobson, who's going to talk to us about one of the secrets for success and happiness. And that valuable asset that we have is called emotional intelligence. And people with emotional intelligence use the law of 9 to overcome challenges and, of course, beat the odds. And, of course, become happier. So let's jump in to understand what that law of 9 means, this powerful framework, and how we can use it to become happier in our everyday lives. Let's jump in right now. Tip number 1, they see what's different about empathy. And what do we mean by that? Well, there are different psychological states out there, and empathy is a very unique one, and it's one that has to be differentiated from something called sympathy. Sympathy is when you feel sorry for someone, like you feel sorry for another person. But empathy is actually very interesting. Empathy is a mental process that allows a person to actually recognize an emotional state of others and feel that way. So for example, to be empathetic means that if a person's anxious, you're anxious as well because you're feeling how they're feeling. You share in their anxiety that they're feeling right now. And the emotionally intelligent person understands that. So the first part of this rule of 9 is to understand empathetic feeling. Tip number 2, they appreciate the different types of empathy. There's actually 2 forms of empathy that psychologists, neurologists have all agreed upon. The first one is emotional empathy. You feel something, someone else feels the same way, or you feel something that someone else feels. It's a form of empathy that is outside of our conscious or awareness, but you understand it. The second part is cognitive empathy, and this is something that people with higher EQs start to realize. It's a newer form of empathy, or newer form in terms of discovery, but it's really about perspective thinking. The newer type is a conscious choice to deliberate and to really think about, how does that person feel? What's the perspective that they're going through? When you put together your emotional and cognitive empathy, you have higher EQ. So think about that as well. Tip number 3, they are aware of the limits of their empathy. And this is really important because having empathy is by no means a panacea. It doesn't mean that it's a perfect thing. And you can't have empathy all the time. It's just not the right answer. And it doesn't mean if you have empathy all the time, you're going to be happy all the time as well. You have to understand that there is a time for emotional empathy rather than rational empathy as well. And emotionally intelligent people understand that there's limits of empathy, putting it to use when the situation calls for it, as opposed to putting it to use all the time. So understand your limits of empathy and when it can be applied in certain situations versus other ones will help you in terms of your happiness and growing your overall EQ. Our last tip, they understand the importance of emotions. Ancient belief systems, believe it or not, they were engineered with the notion that emotions were bad. You couldn't be overly happy or overly angry. And the Stoic philosophers thought that these passions were an excess of suffering, distress, and they would cause actually bad things to happen to you. Well, reality is that's not the case. We actually know that it's more important, and they couldn't be more wrong in what they were saying. It's important because psychology and neuroscience over the past few decades have proven that emotions are integral to basic human function. So even higher order reasoning and decision making rely heavily and extensively on emotions. If you understand the importance of your emotions and how you can use them for you as opposed to against you, it will increase your happiness as well as your overall EQ. That's a wrap for this week's EQ video tip. Again, watch us next week for the next edition and the second part of this emotionally intelligence growth tip. Hopefully you can take these tips, use them to your ability to become a better emotionally aware person, and of course, grow your happiness. So that concludes our EQ video tip for today. Try incorporating some of these tips into your daily routine. But remember, use what works best for you and personalize it for yourself. Thank you always to our great research team for providing us with some great tips today. As always on EQ Video Tip, we want to end with gratitude. So thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. Here are some resources that you can use if you want more information on EQ going forward. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.